As the sun sets down behind me, another even shorter day, I want to talk about some of the plants I lost last winter and the lessons, the things I've learned from it that might help you when you're overwintering your garden plants this year. Whilst my Dicksonia Antarctica tree ferns really have done so well this year, some of them got hit a little bit by last winter, but given the minimal protection I gave them, this summer all that wet, cool weather has really helped them bounce back. They've done so well. Unfortunately, the same can't be said for my Cyathea medullaris, the black tree fern. And that's a fern that I lost last winter. And when I say lost, the top went completely mushy. What I should have done with that plant is given it a heated enclosure. Plants like that never really have a long-term chance at success here in the UK without heated protection, which is fantastic if you can give that plant the time and effort it requires every single winter to protect it. I didn't have that time last winter, and instead I covered the plant with several layers of fleece. Unfortunately, the fleece wasn't enough, and I found that out pretty quickly after that second cold spell. I unwrapped all the fleece and the top croziers fell out. Most of the plant was just a mushy mess inside, and I realised then that it was a goner, which was entirely my own fault. But what are a few things that you can learn from this? Well, number one, some of the exotic plants that are available to buy in this country don't have a realistic long-term chance at not just thriving, but actually surviving in your garden necessarily. So it's well worth putting a bit of research before you plant a plant, just to make sure, is that plant going to have to be protected every single winter? And if it gets to a height where you can't protect it anymore, what's its chances? Here, unfortunately, we don't live in Cornwall. I'm in North Lincolnshire. So winters here are going to be significantly colder. And when you're growing a plant that has a -3 sort of limit, that plant is going to reach that limit pretty much every winter where you don't have a very mild one. So really, for me, although I knew I needed to give it heated protection, I didn't do it. And that plant was never going to survive here long term without it. Point two, if you're going to grow one of these plants, like I did, and if you know you need to protect it with heated protection, like I did, you need to make sure that you actually give it that heated protection. If you're growing a borderline hardy agave, make sure you build the overhead cover for it. If you're growing something that needs a full enclosure building over it, make sure you do it. Have the pieces you need to build it ready and give yourself the time to do it every winter before it's cold enough to actually need it. That really is a recommendation. And thirdly, the third lesson, this applies to a lot of exotic plants. Definitely don't overestimate how important fleece is. Fleece is great for actually trapping in some of the heat close to the ground. It's great for just keeping the frost off fresh new growth, but it has its limits. Fleece doesn't automatically protect a plant. And if you completely wrap a plant, once it's been cold for maybe a couple of days, once you've had a prolonged freeze, that plant is going to be pretty much the same temperature as the outside air. So there's definitely a limit to what fleece can do. And I think it's really important to consider that. Yes, it's helpful for short-term protection of plants. Yes, it can help protect the crowns of tree ferns, things like that. But if you're wrapping a plant like my Cyathea medullaris or my Phoenix canariensis palm, those plants, it wasn't enough to keep the cold out. So it's important to realise it does have its limits. Another plant that I unfortunately lost is my Agave salmiana var Ferox, a really wicked beastie agave that I had growing just behind me there in this raised bed around my fire pit area. Unfortunately, it just succumbed to the cold. The leaves went black, it went mushy. Yes, it's an agave that survives down south. I've seen it growing in sheltered locations in the south of England with some fantastic ones on Instagram. But here, we're in North Lincolnshire. So although I did everything possible to keep that plant alive, so at the sunny end of the garden, there's good airflow, really good drainage, lots of grit in the soil, it wasn't enough. What I did when it got cold in winter, I should have built an overhead cover over the top of it to keep that winter rain out, but even that wouldn't have been enough to keep out the cold of a real prolonged week-long freeze. And instead, all I could really do when the weather really got cold is put a blanket over the top of it. And unfortunately, again, it wasn't enough. So yes, the common theme is don't grow plants that won't survive in your garden, but I can't leave it there because most of us brave, adventurous, intrepid exotic gardeners, we want to try the unusual. The chance of creating something magical that people won't have seen before is well worth the risk and effort that it takes. But yes, there is a limit to the sensible plants in your garden. So once again, you could say, only grow plants that got a good chance of surviving your location, or check out others' experiences before you plant them. But when it came to that agave especially, I think really the lessons are, firstly, agaves need good airflow. You're always better off building an overhead cover to keep the rain out of them in winter, keeping the plant itself and the ground around it free of too much of that autumn rain. Agaves don't like being wrapped up with fleece or blankets for any length of time, and as soon as that fleece gets wet, rather than protect the plant, you're actually trapping all that moisture in. And you need to remember these are plants from Mexico, places like that, where although we do see snow and cold temperatures, they don't have anywhere near the rainfall, the humidity that we have here in the UK. So it's important to make sure that any protection is correct and specific for the plant you're actually using it on. And I think thirdly, just because you've got a raised bed, you've used loads of gravel, you've got a nice sandy surface to soil, it doesn't mean you're in the Mediterranean. So yes, there is an element of global warming bringing us milder winters, potentially hotter, drier summers. But again, it's important to be realistic. We're going to see periods of more extreme winter weather. So it's important to have a garden that, yes, it can thrive in our drier, hotter summers, but also can take a colder, wetter winter spell as well. The third plant that I'll talk about in today's video was my Schefflera sweliensis, which unfortunately also succumbed to the cold last winter. I had one in a more sheltered area of my garden, and in theory, that would be the perfect spot for it. But it didn't make it through the cold spells. The leaves flopped down, the stem went brittle, the plant was no more. I do grow a lot of different Schefflera here in the garden. We've got quite a lot of mature trees around us. The garden is quite shaded, sheltered, relatively damp in winter. So in theory, that's a fantastic environment for lush and leafy exotic plants like that. But in reality, last summer was brutally hot. The hottest temperature recorded in the UK was just an hour down the road that way. And these beautiful mature trees that actually give the garden that shade and shelter took up most of the water. So things got a lot drier than I wanted them to be. And unfortunately, larger leafed exotics like Schefflera, which need that constant moisture as well as the drainage, really suffered. So when autumn came around and we had all that rain similar to this year, the plants just grew, they raced up, lots of soft growth reaching for the sky, and then winter came and hit them back hard. So unfortunately, that young Schefflera didn't stand much of a chance. I think crucially, there's a few things that you can learn from this. And the first one is, plants like Schefflera are relatively untested here in the UK, and there's lots of new introductions continually being brought out. If you can't find a lot of information on the plant you're going to grow on Facebook or Google, or on Growing on the Edge, some of the various forums for UK growers, then you might be one of the brave, intrepid growers trying it for the first time. So it's important to know that it is a bit of a risk, no matter how suitable your garden is on paper. I think the next lesson is, when it comes to plants like Schefflera especially, it's worth growing them on in pots a little bit, getting them to maybe 2 or 3 foot tall before you plant them out in spring. That way, with them still being potted, you can move them into a polytunnel or greenhouse over winter to keep them protected from the worst of the cold. And as my garden's shown, my Taiwaniana after last winter, the smaller ones struggled after last winter. The medium ones did get cut back a bit, but grew strongly away, and the larger ones were pretty much unaffected by the cold. So it's well worth growing small Schefflera on in pots until they've got a good woody stem, or at least a couple of feet tall, to give them the best chance of getting them through winter. Today's video is just going to be interrupted by these honking geese. There we go, a little touch of autumn. And again, there's more as well. I think the third lesson is, right plant, right place really is absolutely critical. You're probably fed up of hearing that if you see my Mark's Crazy Tiki Garden videos, but honestly, I think for a lot of these borderline plants, whilst it wasn't enough to save that one sweliensis, when it comes to Taiwaniana here in my garden, the ones that have got a bit of overhead canopy from the Trachycarpus or the mature trees around here did so much better following the cold spell. So it really is important to consider that tree fern that you're about to grow, maybe somewhere sheltered that's less exposed to those cold, freezing winds in winter, might be a better spot for it. That palm that you've got, that butea potentially, might need a more sunny spot, somewhere that's raised up, but again, also shelter from those drying winds. So it really is important, if you know a plant's borderline, do the best you can to give it the right, most appropriate spot in your garden. And that way you'll need less winter protection, it's going to look better following a cold winter, and also if you are lucky enough to get it to a size where you physically can't protect it, it's got the absolute best chance of long-term success for you. So yes, if you're going to be brutally stark about it, the common thread between all three of those plants is that they're not really suitable for my North Lincolnshire garden in a cold winter. So I guess that is something you need to be aware of. But let's face it, you're not watching my videos because you want to grow really tough, hardy plants that come through winter no problem at all. You want to grow the exciting, the unusual, the rare, the tropical style plants. And with growing a lot of those plants here in the UK comes an element of risk. So I really would recommend that you are at least educated or aware of how much of a gamble the plants that you've chosen are for your garden. If you know they're going to need protection to get through a cold winter, make sure you've got everything ready to protect them. But above all, if you do lose a plant, it's hard, it does happen, plants cost lots of money, and unfortunately sometimes you can think you've done everything right and still lose it. Because we can have events like last year where the combination of that hot summer, the wet autumn, leading to a very cold start to winter, created a perfect storm of events that really cuts back plants hard. So don't beat yourself up if something doesn't come through, as long as you've done everything you can, or at least knew that it was going to be a bit of a gamble. Let me know in the comment section below. After last winter, did you plant something more unusual, experimental this summer, or have you played it safe? Is there a plant you didn't protect last winter that you're definitely going to protect this winter? Or you can still try and get away with what you can this winter and see what it throws at us? Let me know, I really would be intrigued to find out. Thanks a lot for watching. I'm going inside now because it's starting to get a little bit dark, but I appreciate you all and I'll see you in the next video. See you later.